Welcome back to the Motorcyclist Journey. This is episode 2. It is also Veterans Day, and thank you for joining me. Those of you who have not joined us before, thanks for coming. Those of you that have been here before, thanks for coming back and sticking with me after that first episode. Today, I have the honor of being joined and having a long conversation with Reece Mullins. So many of you know Reece through the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America as past board president, was rally co-chair at the last rally, has been the board secretary, has just done a whole lot of things with the MOA. But on top of that, Reece was a 22-year retired Army veteran. And it's interesting, he tells his story about how his riding of motorcycles and getting involved in the BMW community coincide with his retirement, and it's really an amazing story and some of the things that have gone on since then. But I'll let him tell that. Remember, it's Veterans Day. When we thank our veterans, think about what we're thanking them for. We're all very quick to say thank you for your service as we see somebody in uniform or we know somebody. But truly think about the sacrifice they made. And so for that, I want to take an opportunity to absolutely say thank you for your service. And let's, just before we get into the conversation with Reece, some of you have asked about how the arm is doing in that journey. Still working one-handed. I usually talk with both hands. Got to follow up with the doc this week. We'll do the x-rays, see how things are going. I'll give you an update later. But so far, so good. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Reece. It is a little bit long. I thought about cutting it and doing it in two episodes. But the more I watched it, the more I realized, grab a cup of coffee, grab a seat, and enjoy the next hour. It's definitely worth it.
So yeah, I think the first time we met was probably 2018 in Des Moines. And then we've met several times since then in various events. And, the last couple, the 50th MOA rally in Richmond, Virginia, where I think you were retiring from the board at that time.
Right.
And
I
then,
termed out.
yep. And then last year, or this last June, you were the co-chair for the very next rally in Redmond, Oregon. So
Yep.
you don't believe in taking a break between major volunteer activities, do you?
I do. I actually wanted to take a break. Being a rally chair wasn't something. I was actually potentially sitting out the Redmond rally as my first not being on the board because it was 2,500 miles one way.
Mm-hmm.
From Lower Alabama. And I may have talked to you about this at the rally, and it was just way too. I still have the day job, working for Uncle Sugar.
Yep.
And I only get about 20 days of leave a year, and that 4 days there on the bike and 4 days back, and then 10 days, or being at the rally, it was just a bridge too far. But Sam Garst, who had been picked for the rally chair, his name was floated as one of the potential rally chairs when I was coming off the board. And then I guess that would have been June of right after the Virginia rally was my last. I'd come off the board at the Virginia rally. Mm-hmm. So what was that, 23?
23?
Yeah. So at some point after the rally, they had reached out to Sam, and Sam he runs the Wisconsin rally, very successful, large charter club mm-hmm. rally, the Madison Club, and he's been running that for a while. And he's always been the logistics chair, the unofficial logistics chair, because logistics committee for our rallies has always been an unofficial committee. It's just been some guys who know how to run forklifts and are very logistically minded.
I made the mistake of getting on his truck without permission and guidance at a rally, getting something off. So that was how I met Sam.
Yeah. So you know the deal. Yeah,
I know.
Sam and Stan and Bob Aldridge, Stan Herman, Sam Garst, mm-hmm. Bob Aldridge, and Vance Harrelson have always been kind of the unofficial logistics chair, and they do a great job.
They do.
So he was a really good pick as the rally chair. And then And then he blindsided me at the top of a hill. It was like a proposal, right? We were at the Fontana getaway last year, or year before last now, I guess, in April. Yeah. So 2023. So he was at the Fontana getaway, and we were up on a mountainside. We just came from Tellico Plains, the bakery there, and I was leading a group of 4 riders, and I took a wrong turn, and we ended up at this mountain overlook, and had like a wood thing, and we got some pictures of it too. We could just oversee the mountains, and it was just fantastic. He was like, "I need to talk to you about something," and I didn't say yes right away. I had to get permission from the missus, because again, it was Redmond, Oregon. I was like, I don't know. And then like I normally do before I make a big decision, I get the advice of people I respect. Vance Harrelson was one of them. He's been a rally chair numerous times, and other people, Ted Moyer. And they're like, just because you're off the board doesn't mean you're through. You're not done. You're always going to be involved in one way, shape, or another. And they were right. Once you know the deal. As a regional coordinator and as a registration committee chair, once you get involved, you don't basically get uninvolved unless some major something happens. But yeah, so it's definitely turned out to be fortuitous. I really enjoyed it. It was a very, very successful rally, and on all accounts, I enjoyed working with Sam. I enjoyed working with the committee chairs. It's not something that I had on my radar per se, but on the board, we worked with rally chairs as board members for 7 years. So I really got to see it from the other side, if you will, the board side. And it was a good experience to actually see what it's like, that being our major national event once a year, to see what that looked like on the other side. And it was very rewarding. Like I said, I learned a lot. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of work, but very worthwhile.
Good deal. So for those that listen in that may not know you, may not know your background, let me see if I get this right. And I put this together from conversations you and I have had, and a write-up that I found in the MOA news, and some other sources that you may know and love. But from what I understand, you retired from the Army in 2008. You were a Ranger, helicopter pilot, instructor, and then went back to work for Uncle Sam and are still training pilots today.
Literally.
You've been on the BMW Motorcycle Owners Association, past board member, past treasurer, past president.
Close.
Last year, as we
I wasn't the
about,
treasurer. I was
okay,
secretary and vice president.
Secretary and vice president and president. Last year, you were the rally chair.
Yes, sir.
And amongst all that, you're also husband, dad. And when do you find time to ride?
Commute, right? Someone once told me, I think they were on a Harley at the time. It was some event I went to, and they said, "This is my ticket to freedom right here," and they were pointing to their bike, and I was like, I thought about it for a second, and I was like, my bike is not my ticket to freedom, because it keeps taking me back to work every single day. And then I pointed to the GPS, and I was like, that's my ticket to freedom, because I can plug in any place, anytime, and just press go and go there. So the GPS, I always referred to my 2016 RT with a Garmin Nav 6, but it's true with this one too, with the Motorrad app. When it comes to the navigation, like the A-10 Warthog is an aircraft that was built around a 30-millimeter gun. They built the gun first, and they built the aircraft to carry the gun. The BMW motorcycles I ride are really just built around a GPS. I kind of look at the GPS as the unit that the bike is built around, because with that GPS, it takes me everywhere I need to go. That's my freedom, but that's where I get time to ride. Just basically mostly the commute. I go to, I'm gonna potentially become the Pensacola president here pretty soon. Charter Club number 364. I put my name in the hat. Now that I'm not committed with the national club or rally or any of that stuff, I can give back to the club that I helped start
I did the other way. I was the local club president, and then from there, the regional coordinator, and was honored this last year to be named an ambassador for BMW MOA.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you
Well
very much.
deserved.
There's a, whatever they said in the letter, and I haven't gone back and asked to read the nomination, but it had to be all lies, or they never would have done it. But
I think I saw that letter.
yeah, it's
None of it was lies.
It's interesting that you picked up motorcycle riding after you retired from the military. What or who prompted you to get into the bikes?
That's a good question. Well, to answer that question, I have to answer the question, why wasn't I on a bike sooner? And I can attribute that to the Army and my ex-wife. But enough of that. The Army is very prohibitive when it comes to motorcycle riding. They they can't outlaw it, so they try to make it completely miserable for anybody that does ride a bike, or career prohibitive. And plus I was always deployed. I was always busy. It was just something I wanted to do. I grew up riding mini bikes. My parents rode motorcycles. My dad actually raced something in England called BMX, or not BMX, but sidecar motocross. Those are some of my earliest memories. And then whenever I got out, or whenever I made the decision to retire after combat deployment, after 22 years in the Army, my fourth combat deployment, I knew once I got the DAC job, I knew I got hired for the DAC job, Department of the Army Civilian Flying. I had been an instructor pilot at Fort Rucker for about 2 years once, and as a CW3, and I was the Thunder Flight platoon leader. And in that Thunder Flight platoon leader, I had a DAC named Dudley Carver, who I had known when he was a CW5 and CW4. We went to Bosnia together on one deployment. He was also a former 1st Ranger Battalion guy, so we had a lot in common. And he had a R1200 GSA, and all the Apache guys rode Harleys, and all the 50AD guys rode BMWs, because the 50AD guys were just more technical geeks, right? The 50AD at one time was the most complicated, full glass cockpit, most advanced aircraft in the conventional Army inventory at one time in the 80s, bar none, honestly. Eventually, the rest of the airframes caught up to it, and it wasn't all that in a bag of chips. But the 50AD community always seemed to be driven by tech, or by innovation, or by not the latest and greatest gizmos, but we were always kind of tech oriented. We understood technology, we understood the interface, we understood GPS, we understood avionics, digital displays, multifunction keyboards, entering information. We were very tech savvy. The Apache community is too, but not at that time. But so Dudley rode, and those guys used to go on something called the Man Ride. So once a year, they would coordinate all their leaves to where they would all go on like this 2 weeks worth of leave of nothing but going across country on a motorcycle ride. And this was before social media. And they'd come back with all kinds of pictures and stuff. But there's Dudley Carver, Steve Hebert, Jim Callahan, Russ Cruz. There was another guy, I didn't know him that well, but those guys, what all those guys have in common were they were also Alabama MOA club members and national club members. Jim Callahan was the president of the Alabama club at one point, and Russ Cruz was the president of the GS Giants while I was on the board. So these people were very involved in the club, and that was my early influence. So I volunteered for Iraq with 20 years in the Army. So I left Fort Rucker at that time. It's now called Fort Novosel, to go back to my Unit 125 attack in Hawaii as a 50AD pilot, to go to a 15-month combat deployment. Because I felt it was important as an aviator to do at least one combat deployment. My other 3 combat deployments were as an infantryman. And I had 2 imminent danger deployments as an aviator, but not a combat deployment. And I had lost a really close friend as a result of his deployment. And I was looking basically to right some wrongs when it came to his loss. That's not the way combat works, as it turns out. But I was willing to go do that. But when I got back, when that was over, I knew I was going to be getting out. I knew I was going to be hired as a DAC. I knew what that job looked like. Go in every single day, work every day, 8 hours a day, sometimes 6 days a week. You're flying. It's all consuming. It's not like you're retired and it's just like a consulting job. It's a full-time plus job, and it's dangerous and it's all consuming. I mean, you get away from work flying the DADs with 2 students, doing FADEC manual emergency procedures or gunneries or goggles or anything that high level, intense, that environment. It's like being an Olympic athlete for years. I mean, it's that level of intensity. You don't have time for anything else. You barely have time for family. So you don't have time to go scuba diving. You don't have time to go hunting. You don't have time to go fishing. Not if you're going to be all in and a good employee, a good instructor pilot. So I took the lead of some of my role models and mentors, guys like Dudley Carver and stuff. And I was like, well, at a minimum, I will be able to ride a motorcycle to and from work, right? If I don't have a weekend off, or if I have to, at least I can ride, I can do something that's not work, that's not mowing the grass, that's not taking care of my family, that's just for me, at least at a minimum, to and from work. And that turned out to be absolutely right. It was very fortuitous. Similar to the Motorcycle Relief Project, especially after the Iraq deployment. And I also, as it turned out, when I got back, I went through a divorce. So I kind of almost lost everything as a result of that. But I didn't lose the house and I didn't lose the kids. But I didn't lose the motorcycle, thank God, because really that motorcycle riding was very therapeutic. It turned out to be a godsend, honestly. And I never rode a motorcycle. I mean, I rode mini bikes as a kid, but it's not the same. I never rode a motorcycle. The Army, like I said, had kept me off of a motorcycle, but I used to be an avid cyclist, like a competitive cyclist. I thought that would be enough to, that transfer of knowledge to the motorcycle. And there may have been some habit transfer there, but honestly, not a lot. Because everything on a motor or on a bicycle is kind of low speed, so that oh gosh, I want to say counterbalance, or but what is the term for it? Press, tire goes this way, bike falls this way.
Yeah, slow speed police riders use the counterbalance, more the bicycle methodology than most other motorcycle riders.
Yeah, but once you get above a certain speed with the bike and all that weight, it's
you gotta work it a little different.
Counter steering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
you're not counter steering much.
Yeah, there's no counter steering really in a bicycle. It's all because you just don't get that speed, and there's not enough weight up there. So you're really so that was kind of the hard thing to do. But it was just fate. The way I got into motorcycling ended up being the first, before I was on the board, way before I was on the board. I got an article published in the Owner's News in 2009. And it was, back then they used to have an article, Vince Winkle used to have an article called The First Bike Story. And usually it was just like a 600-word column or something. And I emailed him and Rebecca, I can't remember what Rebecca's last name was. It's changed since, but I was like, hey, I got a first bike story, but it may end up being photographs and 4 pages long. Are you guys okay with that? And they're like, yeah. And it got published. And that was because I think the title of that story was My First Bike Story, Too Incredible to Believe. Mm-hmm. And to this day, I look at that and I'm like, it was my fate to end up riding motorcycles, because how I ended up acquiring my first bike is mathematically impossible. It just absolutely impossible story.
I want to know how you came up with the name Ursula for that bike.
I didn't. It was the original owner. I could tell you how he came up with it. Okay. It was an 05 R1200 RT. Look at you, Mike. you're like a researcher or a grouper or a stalker or something, a groupie or a stalker. You know a lot about me. You know way more about me than I know about you.
Well, I tell
I,
people a lot of the conversations I have come from campfires, and there's a group of guys that I met with last March at the beta test for the Tour Texas rally that I'm going to be talking to about doing the same type of thing. And smoking cigars at rallies, you learn a lot about people.
and you pay attention, obviously.
I try.
Bill, what was Bill's last name? He'll come to me in a second. But the guy, so when I got back from Iraq, my APA, Aviation Position Assistant, which helped my team out a lot in a really bad situation, she rode a Honda Shadow, and I was like, back to the Dudley story. Like, I knew I got picked up as a DAC, and I was like, maybe I should ride a bike. And then I tried to convince myself not to ride a bike. There was this new thing called iPhones back then in 2008, and this new thing called YouTube. You may have heard of it. And so I just started watching, like reading, researching. I went a totally different route. I actually got into motorcycle riding by thinking it was a midlife crisis and I needed to convince myself not to ride a motorcycle by watching crash videos, honestly, doing all kinds of research and trying to convince myself that this is stupid, this is dangerous, I shouldn't be doing this. But kind of like a skeptic who reads the Bible with an open mind, the more I actually tried to convince myself it wasn't a good idea, the more I learned about the sport, and the more I realized that it is not suicide to just go ride a motorcycle. The vast majority of the fatality, I'm a safety officer now, I wasn't then, but so I look at things from a safety analytical perspective. But even then I was kind of doing that. I was like, well, if I'm not drunk and I'm wearing a helmet, it's basically, I started looking at the statistics and I was like, the vast majority of people are dying drunk, on drugs, not wearing a helmet, at night, in the rain, in the dark, not trained, in a curve, you know, in traffic, on a 2 o'clock in the morning, all these things, all these factors. Like, if I just eliminate risk management, right? That's what we do in the Army, right? Risk mitigation. If I just eliminate all those factors, the statistics are basically like driving a car, So I'm like, maybe it's not as dangerous as I thought it was. And then excuse me, got a dry throat. And then I started watching crash video from motorcycle races, which had its own form of entertainment. But I'm like, these guys are going like 200 miles per hour. They're sliding and rolling, and the bike is going all over the place. And then they're getting up and trying to get back on the bike. And I'm like, how come they're not dying instantly? What do they know that I don't know? I'd already told you that the people I knew that were riding motorcycles were predominantly riding BMWs in the environment that I was in before I went to combat. But then I also came across a couple of other things on the internet. An article that that was dated in 2001 from the Honolulu Star that basically talked about, because you just did it. There was this new thing called Google back then too. I went to Iraq in 06. I come back and everything's different. The world had changed. So I Googled, BMW safety, all that stuff. And the Honolulu Police Department in 2001, and this was 07, 08 when I was doing this research, had made the decision to go from Harleys to BMWs. And the reasoning was because the BMW R1200 RTP was more stable at speeds above 100 miles per hour. Not that I intend to go above speeds above 100 miles per hour, but what I do know about some degree of physics is if it's more stable at speeds above 100 miles per hour than the Harley is, then it's also more stable at speeds below 100 miles per hour. So my reasoning there was like, well, that's interesting, right? What I'm reading in this article kind of supports what my peers back at Fort Rucker knew already, and that was that the professionals, when the professionals who do it for a living have to make a choice, they're making a choice, and money, and they're not spending their own money, right? They're spending the taxpayers' dollars, right? The choice they're making is BMW R1200 RTPs in this case, rather than Harleys. And I was like, well, and then I started doing research on BMW R1200 RTPs, and back to YouTube. And then there was this video. There's this new thing called a promo video. That's what they called it. And there's an 8-minute promo video that I've watched probably conservatively 5,000 times. And it's still on YouTube. It's called BMW Ride Through Norway. And it was that bike. It was the 2005, or maybe it was an 06, and it was red R1200 RT, two-up couple riding through Norway, going into hotels, checking out, glaciers, and going on boats, and, just taking this awesome vacation, a couple. I didn't know I was going into a divorce at that time yet, but I was like, this is what I've always wanted to do when I retire, right? Just go out, tour, climb mountains, go fishing, see museums, go to coffee shops, I was like, I think that's what I want to do. And of course, it features the bike two up, going through all these curves, basically just carving these canyon trails that speed on pavement. It was like, that looks like a lot of fun. And that was really, and they had someone I didn't know who it was at the time named Yo-Yo Ma, some really cool, awesome photography, awesome background, nice production. It wasn't a commercial. It was like a mini movie showcasing that product. Right. And BMW was, when I got back from Iraq, that was really the first format I ever saw for that kind of marketing or commercial or whatever. And I was like, this is genius. So that was kind of everything was leading me towards that bike and that brand and that community now that I realize it's more of a community. And then by fate, I was clearing. It was my last day. Do I have time for this? The Absolutely. First bike story, or did you have other questions?
No, go for it.
I was clearing, and I was in that APA. Jules Douglas was her name. She had let me. I had already sent my truck. The only thing I had whenever I came back from Iraq was my truck. That's all my wife left me. A 98 GMC Sierra that doesn't exist anymore because my daughter totaled it. But so I was in a Jeep that she had, a stick shift Jeep that she had that I was borrowing until I left the island. When you're permanent party on Oahu, when you're got family coming and going and household goods and stuff, there's a lot of logistics and administration and coordination that goes on. You can imagine. So I didn't have anything except for a couple of uniforms, some civilian clothes, and this Jeep that she let me borrow because she had multiple vehicles. So I'll never forget it. I had my clearing papers. Everything was signed. I was legitimately out of the Army. I was still in my uniform, my BDUs or my ACUs at that time. And I came to this T intersection on Schofield Barracks, and I was about to go off post and start I had lived on the other side, the windward side of Oahu. If you ever move to Oahu, move to the windward side where the kahukus are. That's the beautiful side of the islands. If you see any movies, Jurassic Park or anything that's filmed in Hawaii, Hawaii Five-0, or any movies that's filmed in Hawaii, it's on the windward side of Oahu. And I'm about to make that trek home. And I come to that T intersection in the parking lot across the street. It's a huge parking lot. It's completely empty except for one bike. And it's a charcoal gray version of the R1200 RT that I'd been watching in that 8-minute promo video for the last month. And I mean, I must have sat, there was no traffic. I must have sat at that stop sign for like 5 minutes, just staring at that bike going, trying to convince myself, don't do it. Do not go over there towards that bike.
Don't go into the light.
Yeah, needless to say, I did not convince myself. So I'm like, well, what will it hurt? I'll just go look at it. And sure enough, I go over there, I park the Jeep beside it. I go over there, I touch it, I look at it, I touch a couple of the controls, I'm looking at the bike, and the more I look at it, the more it's just imprinting on me, like a baby bird. with its mother. I'm just like, it's coming, it's happening. But I don't know anything about this bike or the owner or anything. And I see a truck being unloaded, Army guys, right? And they got a bunch of boxes and they're moving them into the building associated with this parking lot. So, being the soldier that I am and the officer that I was at that time, I do my typical thing. You've seen me at rallies, you know how I am, right? I walked over and I just grabbed a box off the back of that truck and I start moving boxes, right? Many hands make light work. I just started moving boxes and didn't know who these guys were, what they were unloading. I could have been unloading, nuclear secrets as far as I knew. I don't know. Once we got the work done, I asked one of them, I was like, hey, that bike out there, whose is that? Bill Maxwell, that was his name. I knew it would come to me. Like, oh, that's Bill Maxwell's bike. He's one of the motorcycle instructor writers or safety officers upstairs. I was like, thanks. So I walk upstairs. Stairs come out. There's like a common room or whatever, and there's to my left, there's like a door, and I could see some desks and somebody sitting in a desk. I walk in, I just walk in there. I think there was a sign that said, safety division or something for Schofield Barracks. I walk in, and right to my right, not the guy that I could see, but right to my right, there's another guy, turned out to be Bill Maxwell, sitting behind a desk, and he had a BMW toy motorcycle sitting on his desk. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's the guy, right?
That's the guy.
So I introduced myself, and I'm a CW4 at the time, with 22 years in the Army, and I was 41 years old. I'm like, hey, is that your bike out there? And he's like, yes, that's my bike. And I'm like, well, I've been watching, and I just told him the story I told you. I'm thinking about riding a motorcycle. I've been doing some research. I'm getting out of the Army. I just got back from a deployment, right? And his typical, as the safety officer, he was a GS-12, Department of the Army civilian, like me. At that time, the safety officer for all of Schofield Barracks, former Air Force guy, because he had Air Force stuff, A-10s, all kinds of Air Force stuff all over the back of the walls behind his desk. And in his normal clientele, for lack of a better term, are Army guys who get back from a deployment who are 18 to 21 who want to buy a sport bike, and he's got to convince, and he's got to train them, because Hawaii, unlike Alabama, you have to pass a BRC basically at the state level, not the Army one, not just any BRC. Right. They have a state-run BRC. I don't know how other states are, but Hawaii is that way. And apparently it's really tough to pass, and a lot of people don't. But that's his typical person. So he had never had a 41-year-old guy that's never rode a motorcycle, that was getting out of the Army, that was drawn to him through his bike, because it wasn't a dirt bike, it wasn't a sport bike, it was something completely different. And I sat down, we talked to him for a while. Real personable guy, lifetime MOA member, as it turned out. You can see why. So we started talking, and I think it was refreshing for him, right? Because he actually got someone that had gone through and did all the research, and was mature, knew what he wanted, had an idea about what he wanted, was willing to do whatever it took in order, not circumvent, not try to get by with the least, to go all in, right? Just in that conversation, that's where it all formed out. And then towards the end of that conversation, I was like, so you were in the Air Force? He goes, yes, I was in the Air Force 20 years, etc. And I was like, well, what did you do in the Air Force? And he said, I was weather. I think he said he was weather, or a firefighter. I think he said initially I was a firefighter. Yeah. I was like, oh, firefighter. I was like, where did you do tech school at? And I quit asking this question a long time ago, because Chanute Air Force Base had closed down in the early or late 80s. And he said Chanute Air Force Base. And I was like, holy cow. I grew up on Chanute Air Force Base. I was like, no, he was missiles. He wasn't a firefighter. He was missiles. Because my mom taught missiles for the Air Force. So my dad was a student training advisor. My mom taught missiles. And he was a missile tech. And I was like, a missile tech? Really? and she was the only female instructor on Chinook. So if he had her, he wouldn't even have to remember her name. If he had a female instructor, it would have been my mom.
Right.
So that's where I went first, right? I was like, so did you have a female instructor named Elizabeth Mullins? And he goes, no. But now that you mention it, I did have a student training advisor, which is like a AIT drill sergeant. They're
Mhm.
kind of like I don't know if you're familiar, but they're kind of like the enforcement guys that do barracks inspections and adult supervision for 18 to 19-year-old kids that are going through tech school in the Air Force. And he rode a Honda Silverwing, and that bike was the inspiration for me to start riding motorcycles. I was like, that guy was my dad. So half a world
That's
away,
amazing.
3 decades later, the guy who taught me how to ride a motorcycle and ended up selling me my first bike, Ursula, was inspired to ride a motorcycle by my dad, who he didn't even know, with that Honda Silverwing, that burgundy Honda Silverwing, which if you've ever seen one, looks a lot like an RT. You know, it had the hard side cases, the full better fairing. It was carbureted, and I think it was a 650, but I think it was shaft drive, but it may have been chain drive. But it was very quiet, very muffled, very smooth.
Yep.
Windscreen, all that stuff. It was kind of like the early predecessors. It looks a lot like an RT, like an early RT.
I think the original Silver Wings were even 500s.
It was either a 500 or 650.
They're great bikes.
You know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly the bike.
That was the bike that my dad had at that time, and it is what inspired Bill Maxwell, E1 in the Air Force, to start riding motorcycles. And he basically kind of made it his career. You know, he became the motorcycle safety trainer for every Air Force base he ended up going to. He rode BMWs all through Germany and Europe and stuff when he was stationed over in Europe. And he ended up, he's like, I've been thinking about every 3 years I buy a new motorcycle, because apparently it's like a tax write-off for him, because he uses it to do his job
For his training.
For his training, because he was the primary motorcycle coach, MSF qualified motorcycle coach, for all the training. That was his primary job as the safety officer for Schofield Barracks, was to take care of the motorcycle problem we had with kids going out there and killing themselves. And she was like, I was thinking about selling it. So we met at the Leilahula Golf Course, I think it was called. They're off of Wheeler, which was a military golf course. I don't golf, but they have a lunch place. And we basically did the deal. Jules was there. She was like, you really need to buy this motorcycle. You need to do something for yourself. This is retirement. You need to do something. She's the one who convinced me. And I was like, no, okay. So I had some money, because I had to take control of my finances while I was over in Iraq, which I did, thank goodness. And by doing that, I had some money to spend. And he offered to, it had about 23,000 miles on it. This was in 08. Yeah, 08. And it was a 2005. So less than 3 years old, 23,000 miles on a R1200 RT, and he wanted 12,000 for it. And I said, sure. So we took on it, and then he had to keep it. He's like, but I'm gonna go do this tour with the family on Maui. I was like, sure, no problem. I mean, I'm not trained on it anyways. But so he ended up keeping it actually until at his place, because I didn't have a place to keep it. Plus, I wasn't qualified. I didn't have a license or any of that. So he kept it at his place. I paid him for it. It was my bike, but he was still keeping it. He had a dirt bike that he had as an alternate bike until he ended up replacing it with an R1200 GS, which he still had like years later. So he liked the GS. He never sold the GS. He kept it.
The GSs are addictive.
But apparently.
Yeah.
He loved that GS.
I sold mine when the doc told me I could not. She didn't tell me I could not ride on dirt, but she said if the tires touch dirt again, don't come back and see her to put anything back together anymore. And I went from the GS to, I bought a 95 RT police bike, a K75 RTP, as a kind of an in-between. I'll ride this till I figure out what I want to buy. and
Yeah.
put 5,000 miles on it in June, going out to Redmond and back, and it kind of sucked into my soul and said, "No, I'm yours. You're mine. I'm staying."
Yeah. It imprinted on you, huh?
Yes, it did. Very much so.
It happens.
I think that
It's
bike
easy to
imprinted
do.
on a lot of people at the rally because everybody kept coming up and asking what it was.
I think I saw your bike at the rally.
Yeah, the white
Pretty sure.
police bike.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Fantastic bike. Every time I think of a K75, I think of Jack Rippey.
Jack Reapy, and the other one is the gentleman that does the motorcycle detailing at all kinds of events all over.
Marty,
Marty.
Slusher,
Yeah.
can't pronounce his last
I
name,
just
but
remember
Marty.
Marty's motorcycle detailing. Last time I
Yeah.
saw him, he had a broomstick stuck through the frame to use as front pegs, and was still riding. One other question before, because I know we've run a little long, but I do want to ask you about one thing. You had mentioned the Motorcycle Relief Project, and I know BMW Motorcycle Owners Association has the they're working together with the big sweepstakes that's coming up in December with the trailer and the truck and the bikes and the whole that Chad Warner's working with. But they've also been at the rallies. They've been vendors. There was some question at one time about they were needing some more donations because some of the bikes were aging out, things like that. And I don't want to get real deep into what they do and how they do it, but do you know how they're doing as an organization these days?
Um, I mean, I don't personally. Mike Bobbitt would know. He is
Yeah.
the president, or JJ Lewis. He's on the board specifically. And they're a 501(c)(3), so they have to provide that information publicly in some format,
Yep.
to some degree, just like our foundation does. But my understanding is they were getting really tight on their operational funding a year ago, and then the foundation did a raffle
Mhm.
for a specific bike for them, and all the proceeds of that raffle went to the Motorcycle Relief Project, and it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about $60,000, which based the proceeds, we wrote a check for them, and it basically funded their operation for the next year. So,
Fantastic.
like any other 501(c)(3), it's a primary source of funding is through donations, and it's always, any kind of foundation, it's always challenging to keep those funds coming in on an operational basis year by year.
Yep.
So
Yeah, Mr. Bobbitt is one of the guys I want to reach out to because I want to give him an opportunity to do this and reach out to folks. For folks that don't know what they do, it's veterans, first responders, emergency personnel that have been through the thick of it and have some lingering things that they need to work on. They basically they go out and spend a week out on bikes where bikes aren't normally ridden, and they do some wonderful things. And I always have a hard time explaining how they do what they do, but the folks I've heard from and the articles I've read and the interviews I've seen with people who have been through it um, have nothing but wonderful things to say about the program.
Yep. It's there's really, it's not that complicated. Just like I said, when I got back from Iraq, which was an extremely difficult deployment, way more difficult than I thought it would be. And then I went into a divorce right afterwards. Um, I told you the motorcycle was my therapy. And for many of us, right? The motorcycle is very therapeutic. It's cathartic. Golf is cathartic, I've been told, right? Because it requires concentration. Motorcycle is cathartic because it requires concentration. Um, the other aspect of motorcycle riding, and which is probably true with golf also, or any other pastime, um, is it puts you in a community of like-minded people. And Motorcycle Relief Project kind of does that squared. You got the cathartic aspect of motorcycle riding. Usually most of the people who go there, my understanding, are already motorcycle riders. Many of them are like Harley riders. They haven't rode off-road. They haven't rode BMWs or GSs. So they have to have some training on off-road training, which makes sense. But they have, they're not having the stress of learning to ride a motorcycle. It's for motorcycle riders for the most part, or people in a sidecar, or maybe a chase vehicle or something. So you have the cathartic aspect of motorcycle riding in the wilderness, which can be very cathartic, very healing, coupled with, us placed in a group of people that you have a lot in common with as former military, and facilitators. I've talked to Mike about it quite a bit, and his predecessor as well, as far as the president goes. And it's a very worthwhile project. I believe in the mission. And I wish them the best of luck. I had the honor of presenting Mike Bobbitt his ambassadorship up on stage at the Redmond rally. I wasn't expected to do that. It just happened that way. As the rally chair, Ted brought us up, and I think Mike was there, Sean Thomas was there, and were you the other? There was at least three.
No, I got mine. Mark Austin, who used to be on the board for the foundation, presented me mine here in Dallas.
That's right.
Yeah.
There was one other person. Like, I failed to remember who it was, but I definitely remember Sean Thomas and Mike Bobbitt were standing right beside me.
Yep.
And I remember them, and that was a big honor for me to have the opportunity to present them with their ambassadorship. Oh, I know who it was. It was our truck driver, the guy who also it'll come to me again. He's a good Brad Doyle. Brad. So those were my three that got the ambassadorship at the Redmond rally up on stage. Mike was standing right beside me. So
great.
They earned it. They're worthy ambassadors. The Motorcycle Relief Project, though not affiliated directly with the MOA, is very indirectly affiliated with the MOA and the foundation, because there's a lot of parallels and cross-pollination when it comes to the mission and the community. And I definitely believe in taking care of veterans.
Yep. And on that note, I apologize for filming this on the Marine Corps' birthday, but Chad Warner will be very happy with that. But since tomorrow is Veterans Day, I do want to say thank you and